Good morning, everybody. This is Walk the Dog, Season 2, Episode 30. And I'm recording this on Wednesday in between two meetings, so I got to watch the clock. But yeah, it's Wednesday. It's 1 week into the patch. Next patch comes out in a week. Things just got locked today. A bunch of it's on PBE. There's a really funny patch note that if you only look at the data mine for T-Hex, it's probably going to confuse the heck out of you if you want to see it. But basically, it's like T-Hex's spell damage is almost doubling. And you look at that and you're probably going to be like, excuse me, what? So can't wait to talk about that one at the patch rundown. But obviously, we're not insane. So, there's context. But yeah, otherwise, work continues. I'm excited for Riftbound cards come before the weekend. I was able to pick up a couple boxes, so at MSRP, which is nice. Was able to find those. That's good. And then I'm going to play Eugenics this weekend, which I'm also excited for. So I don't know. And then I also have a project I'm doing Monday, personal project. So it's going to be a fun weekend for me. I'm looking forward to it. Just trying to get through the week to get to the weekend where I'll have lots to do. And then next weekend, my wife's birthday. And yeah, so overall good stuff. Also, there's no work on Monday, which is kind of nice. So yeah. Okay, cool. As always, I brought some questions for you guys. There's some good ones today. The first one is a common question that has been asked a lot, and I've talked about it a little bit, but if we're looking for an answer, because I saw there was a Reddit thread on this as well. How do Shadow Isles soul generation work, and why isn't it just on death get a soul? Okay, so during development, we went with the obvious answer, which was on death get a soul. Really easy, right? The idea was if you were playing Shadow Isles, you wanted really close fights to maximize your soul gain, to get things as quick as possible. That was the design. That made sense. And then the idea was every ability would scale with souls, right? So this is Viego's passive, the number of snips, the number of spears thrown with Callista would all scale with souls, okay? The problem we kept running into was in testing, what would happen is in stage 2 and 3 and 4, you would get to, on average, about 200 souls. Makes sense. But then on stage 5, you would get upwards of another 150 souls. You would get a bunch more souls. And keep in mind, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, how is that possible? And it was a combination of, again, if souls were 1-to-1, and the multiplier from being vertical soul fighter, right? Because remember, or from Shadow Isles, not soul fighter, because vertical Shadow Isles also gives you more souls per drop. So it was possible to go from 200 to 400 even, just in stage 5, and then start reaching numbers of 500 in stage 6, which wouldn't be a problem, right? Because the last unlock is Thresh anyway at 175, 200, except for the fact that all of those abilities scaled. And so what this would lead to is Callista and Gwen and stuff kind of not being very good until 5-1. And then at 5-1, they'd start being really good. And then at 6-1, they would dominate and win the entire fight. And that was just a natural order of the exponential curve of the number of units that were available in fights, right? Late game, you have 8 to 9 units per fight on each side, multiplied by the multiplier of having 4 or 5 Shadow Isles. And so this led to a really hard exponential scaling problem. And so the only solution I could come up with when working with the team on this was that we could do 1-to-1, but then starting at stage 5, we would have to essentially lie. We would have to essentially go, okay, well, starting at stage 5-1, we would cut it in half because that's just how late game works. And the team and I discussed this, and generally the team didn't really like that solution because it felt very arbitrary to just okay, on stage 5, we're just going to change the rules on you. And now it's not 1-to-1. It's going to feel pretty bugged. So instead, what we decided to do was what we essentially call normalize the souls that you gain. And the idea here being that we were going to say, okay, based on essentially where we expected you to be, given a nice healthy curve, you would get souls that get you about that. So that especially the nice thing here was the difference between getting like 4-0'd and getting 4-3'd wasn't going to be that drastic, right? Because the other thing is we could see variants of Thresh being unlocked as early as 4-2 and as late as like 5-1 if you had some bad soul variations and bad fights. And that also felt pretty bad because combats going like 4-0 didn't really feel like they were in your control or not. Or even worse would be like someone opened forts on you and you're just like, well, I guess I'm just down 5 to 7 souls that fight. That feels bad. So instead, like for example, what'll happen is let's say somebody does open fort on you. Well, now you're behind on our expected souls distribution, and the next fight will drop more souls than average to get you back to that. And so what this leads to is that generally, if you have Shadow Isles on 2-1 and you play it like normal, you're going to get, Gwen on 2-6, 2-7. You're going to get Callista on like 3-5 to 3-6 to 3-7. And you're going to get Thresh on like 4-7, assuming you kept Shadow Isles in. It's a nice planned curve. Now, obviously this flattens it, and clearly this has led to a lot of confusion. But that's generally why we did what we did, is that souls are normalized to prevent some of the like ceiling floor cases of extreme distribution based on outcomes that didn't feel like they were in your control. And it allowed us to limit the exponential scaling of souls that would happen in the late game, creating situations where champions like Callista just were too strong. Now, all of this is to say, do I think Shadow Isles ended up kind of not working as a mechanic? A little. Shadow Isles is weird in that it essentially requires a 2-1 commitment and is a stacking trait, but it's a stacking trait that you have to like do well with to start stacking, but then stacks exponentially. It's just, I don't know. Having that much stacking in an entire trait, I think, was kind of weird. I think the thematic gaining souls to unlock champions was good. And like, if you told me maybe just Thresh played off those souls numbers, that might have worked. I don't know. And I think the team would even debate this, right? I bet you there are some on the team who go, no, Shadow Isles is great. But I don't know. I don't think it quite lived up to that stacking bar. Because we didn't have a great solve for that curve problem. So all of this is to say that the things that you're seeing where people are reporting like, well, I didn't get souls or I did get souls, I've played it enough to know that like it's not bugged, right? Like there is some slight variance, but like, for example, I saw someone was reporting like the first round you put it in, you won't drop souls. And it's like, well, that's definitely not true. I've been at 4 out of 20. I've been at 3 out of 20. I've been at 2 out of 20. I've seen all of those happen at 2-1. I am 100% confident in that. And then they'll say, well, then the next round you get more souls. Well, that's true, right? Because, again, if you had a low number of souls in your first drop, we normalize it to make sure you get a high number of souls in your next drop. So that's kind of the gist of how it works. And all of this essentially, it's funny, we always say like TFT has too much randomization. It's actually a very controlled randomization so that, again, as long as you play Shadow Isles, if you wanted to abstract it, you could literally be like, if you play exactly 2 Shadow Isles, you will get Gwen on 2-6, right? Like, that's essentially what we did with just some clever manipulation behind the scenes. So that's kind of how it works, and that's why the souls are not 1-to-1, because it just was an unbalanceable mess if it was. So there you go. Cool. Next question. Someone asked, is Lorefinder a really cool idea, but eventually it has bad influence on balance? Because people need to finish their Lorefinders, then the balance team has to make adjustments to make things better or worse. And I can understand the question, especially because, like, if you were to, out of context, just look at Aurelion Sol and be like, well, no one was finishing the Aurelion Sol mission, so they buffed Aurelion Sol, and then they buffed it too much, and then I could see where you would come to this conclusion. But the short answer is no, right? Because if anything, Lorefinder just puts extra accountability on the live team, right? Because it's like, hey, if no one can win with Zahin or Zahan, if no one can win with Aurelion Sol, shouldn't you buff them? The answer is just yes, right? Like, That has nothing to do with lore finder. That's just champions need a function. I would also say that like one of the more common ones people complain that they haven't completed is Brock, and we have not made any like adjustments based on that. None of us have been like, hey, because people aren't finishing their Brock lore finder, we need to change how Ishtal works and make the quest easier. That's just not a thing we've had that discussion around. So to me, these are very separate issues, right? Like, I do not believe lore finder has had negative ramifications on balance. If anything, it has created accountability. It has forced the team to go, hey, no one's playing with this or no one's having success with this. We should fix it. And again, that's true regardless of lore finder, right? Like, you want Aurelian Soul, one of your 7 costs, to just not exist for a large portion of the set? Probably not, you know. So, yeah, I think kind of a short answer here, but the short answer is no, I do not believe lore finder has had negative influence on balance in any way. Cool. Why do unlocks give a guaranteed copy? Is the question. So this is a pretty easy one, and honestly, we debated it on the team for a bit. But the general idea here is that if the game is going to ask you to do a mission, and especially for some of these harder ones, like say Vagar and Silas, and then you complete the mission, and the game says, okay, Vagar unlocked, right? So you put 2 death caps on someone, it says Vagar unlocked. You get your little pop-up that says Vagar unlocked, and then you're level 8, and you roll 40 gold, and you see 0 Vagars. What is the player going to do when that happens? What is their actual normal human reaction? I'll give you a second to think about it. Now, if you said anything other than the player going, hey, is this bugged? You're wrong, right? Because that is going to be the natural reaction when that happens. The player is going to go, I completed the mission, nothing happened, is this just bugged? How do I tell that it's even in my pool now? What the heck? Right? There's something about you need to do a mission and then get the reward of that mission. And if that doesn't happen with that instant gratification, players will assume the thing is bugged and broken. And again, you could get away with this with something with like Poppy that like unlocks all the time really easily. But like Silas, I don't think so, right? You sell your 2-star Lux, your 2-star Garen, and you're like, okay, cool, now Silas is in my pool at 8, and then you roll and nothing happens? Or, Baron's another good example, right? You reach level 10, you put in Void, and then roll and nothing happens. It feels really bad. So all of this is to say that, to me at least, the answer was pretty obvious when we talked about it, is that, yeah, you need a copy. Like, we just need to give it to you straight up. Now, what I think we learned later on, like during PvE even, was that because of that guaranteed copy, our normal framework for 1-star versus 2-star was wrong, like pretty wrong. I think the best example of this was actually Set. 1-star Set, being relatively easy to unlock at level 8, couldn't be as strong as other 5 costs because he was a 5 cost you could essentially force from any position, right? And so he has to pay a price for that. I think an example of, basically, the ratio of how hard it is to unlock had to be taken into account for their power level relative to 2-star for the champion. So Rift Herald, for example, has a relatively hard unlock condition. I say hard in quotations because it's not hard to play Void, it's just time consuming. But it is a cumbersome unlock. And so Rift Herald 1-star kind of still gets to be strong, but Set is an example where 1-star needs to be significantly weaker. And so the reward needs to be 2-starring them to reach that gap. Now, another place I think, Tim's been really good about bringing this up is that because of this, though, there are certain augments that were problematic, right? So like max build being a good example here. It's like, well, if you can get a guaranteed Aurelian Soul, and then you can get a guaranteed duplicator from an augment, all you really have to do is get lucky and hit 1 Aurelian Soul to hit 2-star. That's pretty powerful, right? And so, if anything, in a set where there were guaranteed copies given through the system, we probably should have been better about like pulling out things like guaranteed duplicators so that the gap between 1 and 2-star could feel good when you 2-star it and things like that. And even now, I think there's some examples where it's like not quite right. So for example, Set the difference between set 1-star and 2-star right now is wide, but man, set 2-star is very, very strong. Likewise, I think Aurelion Sol was another good example of this, where the difference between 1-star and 2-star was just really wide right now. So I let my screensaver click in, so I have to log back in so I can see the questions. Sorry. But yeah, so all this is to say that when we were looking at the system, it was pretty obvious to me you need a guaranteed copy because otherwise it would feel bugged, it'd feel bad, and so we had to do it and balance around it. And I am confident in that decision moving forward. So, yeah. Okay, next question. There's two parts to this question. The first part of the question is, how do you feel about the stage 1 experience? Is there anything you would add or remove? So overall, I would say the stage 1 experience is solid. I think getting some champions, building a starting path, looking at your starting items, and starting to make decisions, I think is working out really well. It gives you a nice anchor point to kind of go, okay, where am I at? What am I doing? Which path do I want to start going down? And then the 2-1 augment feels like the nice sort of end to that journey. You pick your augment and then go play the game. So generally I like it. I think it's good. Now, the question is there anything you would add and remove? There's a couple. The first one is that I think right now, oftentimes there's this moment where you're playing 2 Blitzcranks on your board, and you're the last one to kill your minion, and out pops an orb, and surprise, the orb was 2/3 costs and it's a gold start. Quick, you'd better have your finger on the keyboard and be ready to sell to 10, otherwise you're just not hitting 10 and you had about a second to react to that. That's terrible, right? All the weird APM things that can happen in stage 1, I think are avoidable and should be avoidable. It's probably silly, but I'm going to say it anyway, is we probably should have just had every single orb 100% drop off the first things that can be killed. And I know we did that already for 1-2. We probably should have just done that in general. Because anything that adds to these APMs is just really annoying. It is not a good part of our game. It feels archaic. We could have done better there. Which also then leads into the other one I don't love is I probably should have stuck to my guns on this one, and I don't love how 2-1 unlocks work. I don't love the hold a Twisted Fate, wait for that last item. Quick, you have a half second to figure out what items you want to slam and get them on TF, otherwise you're not getting Graves on 2-1. Like, I do not love that at all. I think that was really, really rough. So that's another thing I would personally remove. So I think that's basically the main thing, is like the APM stuff that happens in stage 1, I think is incorrect. Yeah, I don't think we need to add more variants. I think the variants we already have in gold starts and item starts is in a pretty healthy spot there. Okay, so then this leads to the second part of the question. And this was a different person asking a question, but it felt related. Why aren't openers balanced? Why do some people get 3 costs, some get 2 costs, and I just get gold? Gold feels bad. So this is one that I think you could debate. But right now, when it comes to champion orbs, there really are only 3 outputs. I guess 2, really, abstractly. But let's say you open a blue orb, right? You're either going to get 2 3 costs, 3 2 costs, or 6 gold and a Reforger and Remover. So if you get just gold, know that you got an extra Reforger or Remover. Now, I think you could very, very easily and correctly argue that, like, well, wait, 6 gold and a Remover, that's way worse than 2 3 costs. You're absolutely right. You're just, like, straight up, you are absolutely right, okay? You low-rolled, for sure. Or my favorite one to debate is the people who get duplicators, right? Is getting a duplicator a high roll or a low roll, right? Some people would say high roll, some people would say low roll. Depends on how well you know how to use them, you know? But the question is, why not give everyone the same thing? We have to be really, really careful about the line And this comes back to like the competitive fairness versus like what makes a fun game. Because if every game is just everyone having exactly the same thing, right? If every player has the same augments offered to them, if everyone has the exact same quality of shops, right? Like, why do some players get 3 2 costs in their second shop, but I only get 1 2 cost in my shop, right? Like, there's enough variance within TFT that it's pretty easy to point at any instance of variance and go, but that's not fair, right? Variance is inherently an unfair mechanism. But the idea is over time, with enough variance, the average of those variant outcomes will lead to an overall average balanced experience. And so, yes, you may have gotten 6 gold in a remover while they got 2 3 costs, but later your shop has matching units and theirs doesn't, and that normalizes out to a balanced experience. Obviously, there will be highs and lows of this spectrum. That's just the order of TFT. So the question becomes, where do you draw the line here? Because clearly, in some places, we've regressed, right? Like prismatic orbs is an example where we said, okay, you know what? It's really just too variant for one player to get 4 belts and another player to get, 30 gold, right? Or 20 gold. That's just too variant and not fair. And prismatic orbs were so impactful that we finally said, okay, those need to be fair for everyone. But I'll also even point out that even though we did that, it's actually still not enough for our competitive players, because they are kind of correctly pointing out that at 4-7, if you get a prismatic orb, you have no agency in what you can do with it. And so it's like, well, if you didn't need a bunch of items and you dropped 4 belts, like, sucks to be you, you're just at a disadvantage now, right? Because the other thing is that the more impactful any instance of variance is, the easier it is to point to it and go, it's unfair, right? A single shop being low roll doesn't bother you that much. But like, again, let's take an extreme example here that we'd never ship, but if one player got a gold augment and another player got a prismatic augment, that would be wildly unfair because it's just an in-your-face instance of that variance, right? And the orbs are this to an extent as well, right? Because the orb is something you can clearly point to and go, this was not equal, this is a problem. So all of this is to say that we have to draw a line somewhere in where we want to have these variants be equal. And right now, we say that if it's incredibly impactful, we try to make it as fair as possible. But if it's something that's low impact, and yes, I know the definition of impact here, right? Someone's going to say that, no, getting 2 3 costs versus 6 gold in a Reforger is so impactful, it changes everything. It's like, well, okay. But it's really not. And so we have to draw a line somewhere. And for now, that's the line. That's what we're going to stick to. And I think generally it has been okay. I think if you were to somehow gather the stats of everyone who got 6 gold in a Reforger versus 2 3 costs, you might see a like, well, the 2 3 costs average a 4.49 and the 6 gold averages a 4.51, maybe. Even that's probably not that extreme. It's probably closer to like 4.95, 4.505. But, you could do that. And so, yes, it is a slight disadvantage. But again, we have to draw the line somewhere. That's where we're choosing to draw the line here. And for now, I'm going to stick to that. But again, could I be wrong someday? Maybe, right? Like, again, prismatic orbs we budged on, so who knows? But for now, kind of sticking with it. So, all right. I got time for one more. Yeah, I think I do. What would happen if RNG in combat was cracked down on? And so this person was like, what if you just got rid of crit and changed crit to like some damage amp formula and there was no combat variance? So it's interesting. This question, I think, if you had asked me in set 1, I would have said, well, that'd be really, really bad because every fight would play out exactly the same. It'd be incredibly easy. And I think one of the side effects would be, how Hearthstone Battlegrounds has that app that shows you like what's your percent chance of winning a fight? I think apps would be able to predict those 100%, right? Like it would literally just be at the start of the fight, before the fight even watches, some app could probably calculate exactly who's going to win. Like exactly. which isn't great. Having a little bit of tension in combat is good, and I think having some variance can be okay. But what I'll also say is I think over time the game has gotten complex enough and there's interesting enough variance that I actually am like kind of okay with this. And I think there's ways we could rein it in a little better, right? Like a dumb example, and this is the example I always use, is let's say you have a Ambessa, okay? An Ambessa is standing right here, and to her left is a tank, and to her right is a tank, okay? So she has to pick one of these two targets. Right now, that is done pure random. It is literally just a coin flip, okay? That is an example of randomness in our combat. The question is, does that randomness need to exist? We could make a rule. For example, we could say fighters always pick the thing to their left first in any 50-50. We could do that. Is that bad for the game? I don't think so, actually. And if anything, it could open up a potential skill decision. Another example of a rule could be they always choose the highest health tank, right? And this would allow the defender to maybe go, ooh, I can like try to use health to determine who I want them to attack. Or even weirder could be like, well, wait, I'm going to keep my health low. And then once they start attacking the other guy, I'm going to slam my Warmogs to prevent that tank from taking initial aggro. Like, is that the kind of depth we want? Not necessarily, but like it could add some depth. And I don't think really shallows combat anyway. But that's the kind of thing, like your question is what would happen if we crack down? That's the type of behavior we would essentially be promoting, is people would be able to predict a lot of things and make more interesting decisions around them. And that's why at this point, I'm almost actually kind of like okay with that kind of like crackdown. Again, if a designer came to me with a really strong argument of like, I think fighters should always attack to the left when they 50-50, I'd be like, okay, let's try it. Let's test it out. Let's see if that feels good. Or ranged units. I mean, like, we already have this to some extent with like ranged units, right? They always attack who's closest, right? Instead of a random target that is valid. So, I don't know. There can be some good here. Now, does this mean we need to crack down on all randomness? No. But again, we've been cracking down on a bunch over the years. How often do we ship something that says random target anymore? Not very often. And when we do, it's usually because like, oops, I missed it in the finalization phase and we probably shouldn't have anyway. Cough, cough, fizz. Or, you know, so I don't know. Like, and again, is crits really doing that much? Crits are the kind of thing that like, even if they are doing a lot, no one notices anyway. Most of the time, crits are built, to do, like, people usually build like 80% crit anyway. So, yeah, I don't know. I think, to be honest, I think there could be some even further crackdown on some randomness. I don't know that we need to remove everything like crit, but I do think there could be some crackdown that could actually lead to some extra skill expression and depth. But possibly, it's also the kind of thing that, like, imagine you're a new player and you're like, I want to learn TFT. And then someone goes, okay, well, what you need to know is that in the event of a tie, you're always going to attack the person on your left. And they're like, well, how do I know that? Why would I know that, right? It's not really intuitive. It's just like a designer slapped an arbitrary rule there. And so then that can lead to the feeling, I'm sure some of you have seen the like common player things where it's like, how am I supposed to know this in game? And it's like, well, you just learn it over time, or why isn't there some guide that says it, So, yeah, I think that's kind of it. But yeah, cool. All right, I got to get ready for my next meeting. Hopefully you guys have a great time. Another episode tomorrow. And yeah. All right, that's going to do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.